A flight attendant stops a black couple from sitting in first class, telling them they can't afford it. What she doesn't know? The woman she just humiliated is about to change the entire airline, and nothing will ever be the same again. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss a new one. The first-class cabin had a soft golden glow as the evening flight prepared for takeoff. Most passengers were already seated, sipping drinks or scrolling through their phones. The overhead bins clicked shut one by one as a few last travelers entered. Among them walked a black couple, Morris Ellington and his wife, Raina Ellington, moving slowly down the aisle. Raina held her coat close around her, her steps careful, uneven, as if her hip had been bothering her. Morris walked slightly ahead, helping her past a narrow row and toward seats 1A and 1B. He didn't speak much, only nodded politely to other passengers who glanced their way. Raina's eyes scanned the luxurious cabin, wide seats, folded linens, menus tucked neatly beside champagne glasses. It was her first time flying this way. Just as Morris was lifting her small carry-on into the overhead bin, a voice cut through the calm. "Excuse me," said Chloe, a young flight attendant in her early 30s with a bright red lip and an expression that didn't match it. "First class is reserved for premium guests only." Morris turned calmly, Raina still lowering herself into the wide leather seat. "Yes," he said. "We're aware." Chloe blinked, then stepped forward, scanning their modest clothes. Raina's plain cardigan and old leather bag, Morris's sweater with a threadbare cuff. She didn't even glance at the boarding passes. "I'm going to need to verify your seats. Could you both please step into the aisle?" Raina looked up, startled. "Is there a problem?" Chloe's smile was thin. "It's just a quick check, ma'am." Morris reached into his coat and handed her the tickets without a word. Chloe took them, eyes narrowing as she looked them over. She stood in silence a few moments too long before giving a small laugh that didn't sound real. "I'll have to call the gate just to confirm. Please stay right here." The cabin had quieted slightly. A few nearby passengers were now watching with raised brows, the soft clink of glasses replaced by the hush of awkward interest. Raina's fingers tightened around her purse. She spoke quietly to Morris. "I knew we should have just booked coach." Morris kept his eyes forward. "You've earned better than that. Don't let her make you feel small." From her station near the galley, Chloe whispered to her fellow attendant Tessa, a woman in her late 40s who'd been folding service napkins. "They're in 1A and 1B, Chloe said under her breath. "No way they actually paid for those seats." Tessa didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the front of the plane. "You sure you want to make assumptions like that?" Chloe scoffed. "It's not an assumption, it's experience." Back at the seats, Raina shifted in place, uncomfortable with everyone staring. "I don't want trouble," she whispered to her husband. Morris gave her hand a light squeeze. "There's no trouble," he said. "She just hasn't recognized you yet." Raina blinked. "Recognize me?" He nodded slightly, then leaned back in his seat. "Let's just enjoy the flight, Mrs. Ellington." Raina's confusion deepened, but before she could ask more, Chloe returned with a stiffer posture than before and a forced smile tugging at her lips. She was holding the boarding passes, but her confidence from earlier had started to crack. Chloe stood frozen for a moment, the boarding passes tight in her hand. Her eyes darted toward the galley where Tessa had returned without saying much. When Chloe finally stepped forward again, her voice lacked the sharpness it held earlier. Your tickets are confirmed," she said flatly. "But I'll still need to check with the lead crew member. There's a small seating irregularity." Morris looked at her, expression unreadable. "Our seats are clearly printed," he said calmly. "Unless the aircraft changed models in the last 10 minutes, there's no irregularity." Chloe ignored the comment and turned sharply on her heel, heading to the front of the cabin. Her steps were quicker now, less confident. Passengers in rows nearby leaned subtly to the side, pretending not to listen. But they were. Raina shifted in her seat, her voice low. "Why do you keep saying she hasn't recognized me?" Morris smiled, looking straight ahead. Because she hasn't. Raina stared at him. I'm not famous, Morris. I've spent 20 years working behind a desk. No one recognizes someone like me. He glanced at her, and for a moment, his expression softened. Not yet, he said. At the front of the cabin, Chloe approached the lead flight attendant, Doug, a tall man with gray temples and a clipboard in hand. He had been reviewing meal assignments but paused when Chloe tugged at his sleeve. There's a situation in 1A and 1B, she muttered. I think there's been a mistake. Doug frowned. You confirmed the tickets? They look real, but it's just... Something's off, she insisted. They don't look like first-class travelers. Doug narrowed his eyes. You didn't just say that. I mean, come on, Chloe whispered. They walked in like they just came from the bus stop. Doug snapped the clipboard shut. If they have valid tickets, it's not your place to judge anything else. Go get the names and I'll double-check the system myself. Reluctantly, Chloe returned to the couple. Sir, ma'am, I'll just need your names again. Morris took a slow breath. Morris Ellington, he said. Raina hesitated but added quietly. Rena Ellington. Chloe's pen froze midair. She didn't speak, but her eyes flicked between the two of them, thoughts scrambling behind her stare. Then without a word she turned and nearly ran back to the front. Doug was already typing furiously into the airline manifest system. When he reached the reservation note attached to seat 1A, his fingers stopped. Then he scrolled down. He blinked, leaned back and said, more to himself than anyone else, well, now that changes everything. Chloe leaned over Doug's shoulder, trying to read the screen. What did it say? She asked, breath short. Doug didn't answer right away. He scrolled further, his expression tightening. Then, in a tone much quieter than before, he said, Primary investor. Executive level clearance. Full discretion authorization. He glanced at Chloe. Morris Ellington is on our board. Chloe's face went pale. Our board? Like, corporate board? Doug nodded slowly. He's not just a passenger. He's one of the people who approves our salaries. Chloe stepped back, her mouth slightly open. I didn't know. Did you treat him with respect? Doug asked, though the way he looked at her made it clear he already knew the answer. Chloe didn't respond. Back in the cabin, Raina had opened the window shade, watching raindrops streak sideways across the glass. Her voice was low. Are you going to tell me what's going on? Morris smiled, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. I told you before. You earned this. You think no one notices, but they do. You've worked twice as hard as the ones with the fancy titles. You never asked for credit, never demanded a thing. But this cabin, this moment, it belongs to you. Raina looked at him with confusion and affection. What does that have to do with the flight attendant acting like we wandered in from the alley? Morris sighed. Because when someone spent their life stepping over people like you, they don't know how to act when one of them owns the ground. Before she could reply, Doug appeared at the front of the cabin. He walked directly to their row, posture straight, tone respectful. Mr. Ellington, Mrs. Ellington, I want to personally welcome you aboard. If there's anything you need during this flight, don't hesitate to let me know. Raina blinked. You seem surprised. Doug smiled tightly. Surprised, no. Reminded? Yes. Then with a polite nod, he turned back toward the galley. Chloe watched from the side, frozen in place. Her stomach dropped when she saw Doug give her the smallest shake of the head. Quiet, disappointed, final. She stepped forward a few minutes later, her voice softer now. Mr. Ellington, I'd like to apologize. I didn't realize. Morris looked at her evenly. You didn't need to realize who I was. You only needed to treat my wife with dignity. He leaned forward slightly. But you failed. Twice. Raina remained quiet, eyes focused on the clouds outside the window. Chloe nodded quickly and stepped away, her hands clenched. For the first time in years, she felt like she didn't belong where she stood. For the next several minutes, the cabin settled into a strange stillness. The usual clinking of glasses and polite chatter was replaced with something quieter. Uneasy glances, whispered questions, and passengers stealing looks at the couple in 1A and 1B. It wasn't the kind of attention Raina was used to. She wasn't wearing designer clothes, and she didn't carry herself like someone used to being noticed. But now, they all saw her, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Morris sat upright, calm as ever, with one leg crossed over the other. He reached into his leather satchel and pulled out a slim folder, reviewing documents with quiet focus. He looked more like someone preparing for a board meeting than someone who had just been insulted 10 minutes ago. Raina leaned closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me you were part of their board?" "I didn't think it mattered for a vacation," he replied, flipping a page. "And it doesn't, not to me." "But it would have stopped her from embarrassing us," she said. Morris shook his head gently. "Then she wouldn't have shown who she really was." Raina leaned back again, lips pressed together, her thoughts racing. She thought about all the times in her life she'd stayed silent in uncomfortable situations, on buses, in offices, at dinners. She'd grown used to it. But now, something about the way Chloe had stared at them as if they didn't belong. It struck a different nerve. This wasn't just another moment to swallow. Chloe remained near the galley, pretending to check equipment, but her hands trembled slightly. Every movement felt heavier now, every instruction from Doug echoing a little louder. When she tried to offer a drink to the passenger in 1C, her voice cracked, and her hand shook just enough for the cup to rattle against the tray. Doug came to her side, whispering just loud enough for her to hear. "I suggest you keep your head down for the rest of this flight." Chloe's eyes darted to Raina, who was now sipping from a glass of water, her face unreadable. "I didn't mean any harm," she whispered. "I was just doing my job." Doug gave her a flat look. "Then maybe it's time you learn what your job actually is." Back in their seats, Raina finally turned to Morris with a harder look in her eyes. "I know you didn't come here to make a point," she said slowly, "but if this flight's going to teach someone a lesson, I don't want it to end with silence." He raised his eyebrows. "You want to speak up?" She nodded. "I think I have to." Morris gave a slow, proud smile and folded his papers. "Then say what you need to say. I'll be right here." Just as Raina reached to press the call button above her, a loud chime echoed through the cabin. The captain's voice crackled through the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We're currently experiencing a minor delay due to a message from corporate. We appreciate your patience." A ripple moved through the passengers, confusion blooming across several faces. Raina glanced at Morris, who sat back and laced his fingers. He didn't look concerned. He looked prepared, and that was when she realized. The flight delay had nothing to do with weather, weight balance, or paperwork. It had everything to do with her husband. The chime faded, but the tension it left behind hung heavily in the cabin. People began whispering. Some craned their necks toward the front, trying to catch a glimpse of the cockpit door. Others stared curiously at Morris and Raina, as if finally understanding that something larger was unfolding beyond just a seating disagreement. Raina shifted in her seat, her hand resting on her lap clenched tighter than before. She looked over at Morris, whose eyes were still calmly focused ahead. "What exactly did you do?" she asked, her voice steady but edged with unease. Morris didn't answer right away. He adjusted his cuff and said, "I made a call." Not out of anger, just protocol. "Protocol?" she echoed. He gave a small nod. "If a board member is disrespected, the airline has a chain of action they're required to follow. I activated it." Raina's breath caught. "You mean this delay, this announcement, that's because of you?" "It's because of her," he corrected gently, tilting his head toward the galley where Chloe stood motionless, pretending to read a checklist that hadn't changed in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, at the very front of the plane, a discreet buzz sounded from the cockpit. Doug answered the interphone, his tone quiet and formal. After a few tense exchanges, he hung up and exhaled slowly. He turned to Chloe and said, "They want a full statement from you." Now, while we're still on the ground. Chloe blinked. Statement? About what? About your interaction with passengers in 1A and 1B, Doug said plainly. And it's being recorded. Chloe's mouth went dry. They didn't say anything to me. You don't need a complaint when the person you offended is part of the company's decision-making circle, Doug cut in. They're watching the flight logs. You're part of the flight logs. Every note, every seat change, every delay. Chloe looked like the walls were closing in. Back in first class, Raina stared at the floor for a long time. She'd spent so many years learning how to shrink herself in situations like this, moments when dignity was challenged, but the easiest option was silence. But now, the silence felt like betrayal, not just to herself but to every person who had ever been treated like she had. She sat up straighter, pressed the call button and waited. Doug returned, clipboard in hand, composed as always. Mrs. Ellington? He asked. I'd like to speak to the flight supervisor when we land, she said, and someone from the airline's executive office. Not about the seats, about the culture on your flights. Doug gave a respectful nod. I can arrange that. And I want it in writing, she added, her voice firmer now. This isn't about punishing someone. It's about making sure it doesn't keep happening. From behind, a quiet voice interrupted. I really am sorry. It was Chloe, standing a few feet away, hands clasped in front of her, face pale. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. Raina turned to her, her gaze steady. That's the thing. You didn't have to try. Chloe's mouth opened, then closed again. For once, she had no reply. Morris watched the moment in silence, letting his wife take the lead. He saw something new in her, a strength that had been there all along, now finally rising. And as Raina turned back in her seat, calm but resolute, the hum of the engines grew louder. The plane began to taxi slowly toward the runway. Whatever delay had been necessary, it was done now. But Raina knew this wasn't the end of anything. It was only the beginning. The plane lifted off the runway with a gentle jolt, and the faint roar of the engines filled the cabin as they climbed into the sky. Raina watched the lights of the city shrink below her, her hand resting lightly on the armrest between her and Morris. Her breathing was steady now, but her thoughts moved quickly, faster than the aircraft itself. She wasn't used to this feeling. Not just the guiltless presence in first class, but the shift, the sudden power of being seen, not for what she wore or how softly she spoke, but for the truth that had always been buried under decades of restraint. She wasn't angry anymore. She was awake. Morris leaned over, placing a hand over hers. I meant what I said earlier, he said. You earned this seat, and not because of my name on a document. Raina didn't smile. I didn't ask to teach anyone a lesson. I know, he replied, but you did anyway. Just then Doug returned, his tone calm and professional as ever. Mr. and Mrs. Ellington, he began. Just to inform you, the airline's executive liaison has requested to speak with you upon arrival. A conference room has been arranged at the terminal. Morris nodded without hesitation. We'll be there. Doug paused. Also, a message was sent directly from the CEO's office. They've reviewed the real-time report and would like to offer a formal apology, both to you, Mrs. Ellington, and to Mr. Ellington in his capacity as a board member. Raina raised her eyebrows slightly. They reviewed it that fast? Doug gave a small nod. It was flagged as urgent. The level of clearance tied to your profile triggered a direct alert to executive leadership. Everything's been monitored since the moment your names were entered into the manifest. Raina glanced at Morris. You didn't tell me all this would happen. I didn't expect it to, he replied. But I knew it could. Doug continued. A formal memo will also be issued across internal staff channels regarding respectful conduct and ticket verification procedures. Raina let the words sink in. It was satisfying, somewhat, but also sad, that it had to come to this, that human dignity required official memos and corporate intervention. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Doug. That will be helpful. Doug bowed his head respectfully and moved on, continuing his rounds through the cabin. From a few rows back, passengers who had quietly watched the earlier exchange now avoided eye contact. One man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "They're not just passengers, are they?" His wife shook her head. "Number. And I think she's the one they'll remember when this flight ends." Meanwhile, Chloe remained near the galley, wiping down surfaces that were already clean. Her chest felt tight, as if her uniform itself had shrunk. Tessa approached quietly, a paper cup of water in her hand. "You okay?" she asked without much sympathy. "I made a mistake," Chloe whispered. "A stupid one." Tessa handed her the cup. "One mistake doesn't ruin you, but what you do after it, that's what matters." Chloe looked toward the front of the cabin, where Raina now sat with the quiet calm of someone who had decided, after years of silence, that she would never shrink again. Her words earlier still echoed in Chloe's mind. "You didn't have to try." Back in 1A, Raina looked out the window again, the stars peeking through the clouds. Her thoughts wandered to all the other women like her, who worked quietly, moved carefully, waited politely. Women who carried dignity like a secret, never demanding to be noticed. For once, she didn't feel invisible, and she was going to make sure that after this flight, neither would anyone else. Dinner service had begun, but the air still carried a weight that had nothing to do with altitude. Silverware clinked softly on fine china, glasses shimmered with reflections of cabin light, but conversations were hushed, hesitant. Every few minutes, someone would glance toward Raina and Morris only to look away quickly when either of them shifted. Raina sat quietly, her linen napkin resting untouched on her lap. She wasn't hungry. The flight attendant, someone new, not Chloe, had placed the meal in front of her with a polite smile and no questions asked. Morris was cutting into his food, calm and methodical, as though he were back in one of his business lounges preparing for a strategy meeting. "Are you going to eat anything?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "I don't think I can. Not yet." He didn't push. Her thoughts were tangled. It wasn't about Chloe anymore. Not really. It wasn't even about the apology or the conference room waiting for them on the ground. It was the realization that this moment, this strange, frozen place in the sky, had changed something inside her. She wasn't who she was when she walked onto this flight. Something had cracked open, and yet guilt crept in. "I didn't mean for her to be humiliated," Raina said, voice low. Morris looked over, fork paused in midair. "You didn't humiliate her. Her choices did that." "She looked scared," Raina continued. "Not of me, of what comes next. What happens when we land, I know what fear like that feels like. I don't want to be the reason someone else carries it." Morris set his utensils down, folded his hands. "Do you know what else fear looks like? It looks like you every time you've walked into a boardroom and wondered if you'd be dismissed. It looks like you biting your tongue when someone interrupted your ideas. And it looks like you, Raina, choosing silence over discomfort. For years." She looked at him, eyes stinging. "You didn't create her fear," he said softly. "You just stopped carrying yours." Across the cabin, Chloe remained near the service curtain, out of view. She hadn't touched her crew meal. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Raina's face. Not angry, not loud, just honest. And that honesty had done something Chloe couldn't shake. It exposed how shallow her understanding of people really was, the way she'd looked through them instead of at them. Tessa came by again, this time with a folded note. "It's from Doug," she said, slipping it into Chloe's hand. She opened it slowly. "Final review of today's log has been marked. You'll be expected to meet with internal affairs the moment we land. Cooperate fully. Keep quiet. Be respectful. This is still your job to lose." Chloe folded the paper back up, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure what she feared more, losing her career, or being remembered as the woman who looked at dignity and didn't recognize it. Meanwhile, the cabin darkened slightly as lights dimmed for rest. Passengers adjusted pillows, some pulling on sleep masks. Raina didn't move. Her eyes stayed wide open, watching the clouds float past her window. Morris reached over and gently closed the lid of her tray. "Get some rest," he whispered. "You're going to need it." She turned toward him. "Do you think they'll actually listen in that conference room?" "They'll have to," he said. "You won't be the woman they expected." Raina leaned back into her seat, her head against the soft leather. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't shrinking into silence. She was gathering herself for something bigger. The cabin grew quiet as the flight settled into cruise mode. Overhead lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, and the hum of the engines created a gentle backdrop for rest. But neither Morris nor Raina closed their eyes. Sleep would not come. Not tonight. Raina stared at the back of the seat in front of her, her thoughts loud against the hush. She could still feel Chloe's voice in her bones, that sharp-edged tone from earlier. First class is for premium guests only. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the certainty behind them. The certainty that Raina didn't belong. She didn't want revenge. She wasn't angry the way people assumed angry looked. She just couldn't let the moment pass into silence like all the others in her life. Something about it felt final, like the end of the old version of herself. Morris gently opened his laptop and began typing with practiced precision. Raina glanced sideways, curious. "You working?" He didn't look up. "Just drafting something." "For who?" He paused for a beat. "The board." She turned toward him. "About the flight?" "About everything," he said. "What happened tonight? It's not just a one-off. It's a reflection of something that's been brewing inside this company for years. You've seen it in your office, too. Unwritten rules, quiet discrimination, low expectations dressed up as procedure." Raina gave a faint nod. "It's everywhere." Morris continued typing. "I'm recommending a structural change. Mandatory inclusion training, third-party oversight, anonymous passenger feedback audits, and something new." Raina raised an eyebrow. "New?" He looked at her now. "A passenger advocate role, someone on every long-haul flight trained specifically to handle bias-related concerns before they turn into lawsuits or headlines." Raina blinked. "You're going to create that just because of this flight?" "Not just because of this flight," Morris said quietly, "because I should have done it years ago. But tonight made it personal." She leaned back in her seat, absorbing the weight of it all. The way her husband's mind worked always amazed her. Not just decisive, but strategic. Not just outraged, but solution-focused. But her silence lingered. Something inside her still wrestled with the thought of Chloe standing in that galley, knowing that fear, too. "I want her to be held accountable," Raina said slowly. "But I also want her to understand. Not because of what I am, but because of what she almost destroyed." Morris closed the laptop and gave her his full attention. "You want to speak to her before we land?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but not while everyone's watching. I need her to hear me. And not the version of me she made up in her head." Morris motioned to the call button, but before he could press it, Tessa appeared quietly, almost as if she'd been waiting. "I can give you a moment with her," she said, her voice calm. "I think she's ready to listen." Raina rose from her seat slowly. Her legs felt heavier than before, as if the truth she carried was something she physically bore now. Tessa led her to the galley, drawing back the privacy curtain. Chloe stood inside, back to the wall, arms folded. She looked up when they entered, eyes wide and unsure. Raina said nothing at first. She looked at the girl, because that's what she was, really, despite the uniform. Someone young, inexperienced, and clinging to a power she didn't yet understand. Chloe's lip quivered slightly, but she didn't speak. "You saw my face," Raina began, voice level. "And you made a decision. You decided what kind of person I was, not based on anything I said or did, just on what I looked like." Chloe opened her mouth. Raina raised a hand. Let me finish. Chloe nodded quickly, biting her lip. You embarrassed me. You embarrassed my husband. But more than that, you embarrassed yourself. Because you thought being polite was optional. You thought that professionalism only belonged to people who looked the part. She took a step closer. And now you've found out that the part isn't what you thought it was. Chloe's eyes welled with tears. I swear I didn't mean— I know, Raina interrupted. And that's what hurts the most. You didn't mean to hurt me. You just didn't think I mattered enough for your care to apply. Silence fell between them. The plane, the passengers, the luxury. It all faded. It was just two women standing in a narrow space, breathing in the same thin air. I'm not asking for your guilt, Raina said. I'm asking for your growth, because someday someone else will board your flight who doesn't look rich or powerful. But they might be holding on to the last shred of their pride. And what you do in that moment could either break them or let them breathe. Chloe nodded slowly, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. I won't forget this, she whispered. I hope not, Raina said. And with that she turned, parted the curtain, and stepped back into the cabin. When she sat down beside Morris, she let out a long breath. She wasn't shaking anymore. Morris reached for her hand. Did she hear you? Yes, Raina said quietly. For the first time, someone finally did. The cabin lights remained dim as the plane continued its flight through the night sky, cruising thousands of feet above ground. Most passengers were beginning to doze off, adjusting their seats and slipping into the comfort of forgettable travel. But for Raina, the moment was unforgettable. She sat still, her hands folded loosely in her lap, her breathing calm. Something inside her had shifted. The quiet strength she carried all her life, often mistaken for passivity, had finally found its voice. Not in rage, not in public spectacle, but in truth, delivered face to face, eye to eye. Morris sat beside her, his posture relaxed now, but his mind still ticking. He turned to her after a few minutes of silence. I saw you walk into that galley, but when you walked out, I swear I saw someone else. Raina smiled softly, her eyes still on the dark clouds outside. It didn't feel like I was giving a speech. It felt like I was letting go of something I didn't even know I'd been carrying. Morris nodded slowly. You didn't raise your voice, but you shook the entire flight. Further back in the cabin, Chloe sat alone in the crew seat near the rear. Her face was blotchy from tears, her chest heavy with emotion. Her hands trembled, still feeling the impact of Raina's words like an echo that wouldn't leave. She had served hundreds of passengers in her few years on the job. She'd prided herself on speed, efficiency, confidence, but never once had she been asked to see people. Truly see them, not for who she thought they were, but for who they were beneath the labels, the stereotypes, the assumptions. Tessa sat down beside her quietly, handing her a fresh napkin and a bottle of water. You okay? I don't know, Chloe whispered. That's good, Tessa said. Means you're not numb anymore. I messed up, Chloe muttered. Yeah, Tessa said plainly. But you faced it. That's a start. Most don't. Chloe clutched the napkin tightly, still staring at the floor. Don't think this ends when we land, Tessa added. That woman, she didn't just forgive you. She educated you. Now you have to decide what you do with that. Chloe nodded once, the truth landing like a weight she now chose to carry. Back in first class, the mood was shifting too. Word had spread quietly among the flight crew that the Ellingtons were not only flying first class legitimately, but that Morris was a powerful shareholder, and Raina, a woman the airline's executive team had never personally met, was now being spoken of in hushed tones by cabin staff as the one who turned the plane around without even standing up. Doug returned to their row with a folded envelope. Mr. Ellington, Mrs. Ellington, he said, clearing his throat. The CEO's office has sent this message through satellite link. It's encrypted for privacy, but the contents are viewable now. Morris took the envelope, opened it, and read silently while Raina watched him closely. After a moment, he passed it to her. To Mr. and Mrs. Ellington, we deeply regret the treatment you experienced aboard Flight 417. We recognize that an apology cannot erase the hurt caused by our employees' actions. However, your courage in addressing this matter with grace and dignity has prompted a formal review of all in-flight service conduct standards. Effective immediately, a full audit of our staff training and evaluation protocols will be conducted. We are also initiating a new advisory board for cultural equity and inclusion, on which we respectfully invite you, Mrs. Ellington, to serve. You are not just passengers today. You are catalysts for long overdue change. With respect, Russell D. Herron, Chief Executive Officer Raina, stared at the letter, stunned. They want me to sit on their advisory board? Morris gave a soft smile. They've finally figured out who you are. But I'm not a speaker, Morris. I've never led anything like that. I don't even know if I belong at that table. Raina, he said gently, that table is waiting for your voice. You don't need permission to belong at it. You built your place in the world a long time ago. They're just catching up. She sat quietly, rereading the last line of the letter. You were not just passengers today. You were catalysts for long overdue change. For years, she had accepted the shadows, the background roles, the polite nods and invisible labor. But here, in the center of a first-class cabin, with the moonlight slipping through the window and a plane full of passengers who had seen what dignity truly looked like, Raina knew one thing with absolute clarity. She had stopped asking for space, and now they were offering her a seat she didn't need to ask for. The hum of the engines filled the silence between them as Raina folded the letter and placed it gently on the tray table in front of her. Her fingers rested on it for a moment, almost as if she were trying to weigh the meaning of every sentence. Around her, the world continued moving. Passengers shifted in their seats. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with soft footfalls. But inside her, something had gone still. I don't know if I'm ready, she said, her voice quiet but steady. Morris turned to her, resting an arm on the divider between their seats. No one ever is, especially the ones who actually should be at the table. Raina gave a dry laugh. I spent half my life trying not to be noticed. Now they want me advising the company. They want your insight, he said. But what they need is your experience. They don't know what it's like to be looked through. You do. You've lived it. That's exactly why your voice matters. She nodded slowly, digesting his words. Then, after a pause, she added, but it's more than just them listening to me. If I say yes, I need to make sure I'm speaking for the ones who never got past the gate. Morris's eyes softened. And that's why you'll do it better than anyone. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Tessa stood there, holding a sealed silver folder with the airline's insignia on the front. She handed it to Raina with a respectful nod. It's from the in-flight supervisor, she said. It includes the initial notes of today's incident and a formal statement request from corporate. They said to give it directly to you, not your husband. Raina blinked. Me? Tessa smiled. Yes, ma'am, you're the point of contact now. Raina took the folder, the metal seal cool beneath her fingertips. She watched Tessa walk away, then looked at Morris. How did we get here? From being asked to step aside to this? Morris leaned back, folding his arms. We didn't move, the world just caught up. At the rear of the plane, Chloe had changed into her spare uniform top, her previous one stained with spilled coffee and sweat. She sat quietly, waiting for Doug, who had gone to retrieve the rest of her incident paperwork. The weight of what was coming sat on her shoulders like an anchor. She thought about what Raina had said, not just the words, but the calm behind them. The grace in not demanding her job, but in showing her a mirror she couldn't look away from. When Doug returned, he placed the file on her lap. Read it carefully. You'll need to sign it when we land. HR wants everything documented before your next shift is scheduled. Chloe didn't ask what that meant. She already knew. Doug hesitated, then added, You've got two choices, Chloe. You can write this off as bad luck and defend yourself the way most do. Or you can face the fact that you treated someone like they were invisible and got reminded they weren't. Chloe looked up, her eyes red. She didn't scream at me. She didn't insult me. She didn't need to, Doug said. Some lessons don't come through shouting. Back in first class, Raina slowly opened the silver folder. The documents were printed in sharp, neat font. Log summaries, timestamps, staff comments, and an unsigned apology letter drafted for her review. Her name was at the top in bold. Raina Ellington, advisory nominee, formal passenger incident review recipient. It was the first time her name had ever stood alone in official airline correspondence. Not as someone's spouse, not as a background name on a reservation, but as the center. "I need a pen," she said suddenly. Morris pulled one from his jacket pocket, handing it to her with a smile. Blue ink, the official kind. She smiled faintly, uncapping it. "Of course it is." And then, with careful strokes, she signed the bottom of the form beside the words, "Statement of Impact, to be used in training and future policy review." The moment she finished, she closed the folder and exhaled slowly. She didn't just want change anymore. She was becoming the reason for it. As the flight neared its descent, the soft chime returned to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the speaker. "We'll begin our descent into New York shortly. Please ensure your seatbacks and trays are in the upright position. We thank you for flying with us today." But Raina knew this wasn't just another landing. It was an arrival into a chapter where silence had no place, and where she no longer waited for permission to be heard. The city lights sparkled below like a broken necklace of gold scattered across the darkness. As the plane descended slowly toward New York, the glow from below rose to meet the aircraft in a quiet embrace. It was nearing midnight, but the cabin was fully awake, if not in body, then in thought. Raina sat upright, seatbelt fastened, silver folder still clutched in her lap. She hadn't opened it again since signing. She didn't need to. The words were already written somewhere deeper, etched into her resolve. Across from her, Morris reached down to tuck his laptop back into his bag. For once, he wasn't watching her. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what she was thinking. "Do you remember the last time we flew together?" Raina asked quietly, eyes still fixed on the window. Morris looked over, brows raised. "Chicago, 15 years ago. You wore a green scarf you hated and we sat in the last row next to the bathroom." She chuckled. "I wasn't talking about the seats." "Oh," he asked. "I meant how I kept telling myself, don't complain, don't draw attention. Just be grateful you're going somewhere." Morris nodded slowly. "And now?" She turned to face him. "Now, I'm not asking permission to exist anymore. If my presence makes someone uncomfortable, that's not my weight to carry." Before Morris could reply, the wheels thumped gently against the runway. The plane slowed with a soft roar, and a scattered applause broke out among a few tired travelers. The lights inside brightened, washing over the cabin and making everything feel a little too real, a little too fast. As passengers unbuckled and rose, the usual shuffle began. Bags pulled from overhead bins, coats shrugged on, goodbyes mumbled to the flight crew. But no one in first class moved to stand in front of the Ellingtons. In fact, several stepped aside. It wasn't out of fear. It was something else, something rare on airplanes. It was respect. Doug appeared again, voice low and precise. "The conference room is ready. Corporate liaison is waiting near gate 4. Security has been notified to give you a clear path through." Raina stood, smoothing her blouse as she did. "I don't need security, just space." Doug nodded. "You'll have it." As they walked slowly toward the exit, the other first-class passengers parted. No clapping, no words, just an unmistakable shift in posture, as if the cabin itself had become aware that someone important had just passed through. Not famous, not flashy, but significant in a way few people ever truly are. At the aircraft door, Chloe stood beside Tessa, hands folded, her uniform pressed but her shoulders sagging with the weight of the evening. When Rena reached her, Chloe spoke without prompting. "I've prepared a written statement," she said, her voice raw. "And I'm submitting myself for retraining, whatever it takes. I know I crossed a line tonight, and I need to fix what's in me that let it happen." Rena looked at her for a long moment. "Then let it start here," she said. "Don't fix it for me. Fix it for the next person who walks in and doesn't look the way you expect." Chloe's eyes filled again, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Rena stepped off the plane, not looking back. The airport terminal was quiet, almost eerie in the late hour. Two representatives from the airline's executive team waited near a small cluster of chairs marked "Reserved, Internal Use Only." One of them, a tall woman in a navy blazer with a headset still clipped to her ear, stepped forward. "Mrs. Ellington, Mr. Ellington, thank you for your time. We've arranged a private meeting room. The CEO will join by secure video link. He's waiting for your input directly." Morris offered a polite nod but said nothing. Rena answered instead. "We'll give you what you need," she said. "But I want this conversation recorded, and I want my conditions documented." The woman blinked, caught off guard, then quickly recovered. "Of course. We'll start with a transcript." Rena walked forward, her pace firm but unhurried. No limp now. No hesitation. Morris followed just behind her, briefcase in hand, his eyes never leaving her. As they approached the glass-walled conference room, a younger staffer inside rushed to tidy up the table. Water bottles straightened, digital tablet connected to a monitor. The CEO's face already glowed faintly on the screen, awaiting their arrival. Rena paused before stepping in. She looked over her shoulder once, back toward the plane they had just exited. A place that once threatened to shrink her had now become the stage for her transformation. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. She wasn't just there to speak anymore. She was there to lead. The conference room was cold, not uncomfortably so, but enough to notice. Its walls were glass on three sides, overlooking the sleeping gates and dim walkways of the terminal. In the center of the room was a long, black table, polished so clean it reflected the ceiling lights like a mirror. At the head of the table, a sleek monitor displayed the airline's CEO, Russell Harron, mid-50s, silver-haired, composed. His corporate smile carefully replaced with a more somber expression tonight. Rena and Morris entered together, side by side. The moment they stepped in, the room quieted. The executive liaison, the assistant with the tablet, and the silent HR observer all stood in place, waiting. Not out of protocol, but out of something closer to caution. The balance of power had shifted before the meeting even began. Russell adjusted his earpiece and nodded into the camera. "Mrs. Ellington, Mr. Ellington, thank you for agreeing to speak tonight. I understand this hour is late." Rena took the nearest chair but didn't sit. Her voice was clear. "Respect doesn't follow a clock, Mr. Harron. It either exists or it doesn't." He nodded again, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "Point taken." Morris placed the silver folder down on the table, sliding it forward. "You've read this, I assume?" "We have," Russell confirmed. "I also want you to know I personally rewrote the apology statement we issued. I didn't want it filtered through PR. Your experience deserves more than hollow language." Rena finally sat, folding her hands in front of her. "I've read your apology. What I haven't seen yet is your plan." The room tensed. Russell leaned forward. "We've initiated a 3-tier response. 1. Immediate suspension of the staff member involved, followed by mandatory retraining. 2. Full review of current staff behavior policies. 3. Formation of an advisory board focused on equity and passenger treatment. I'd like you to chair it, Mrs. Ellington." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she studied his face through the screen. He looked tired, but not in a way that invited sympathy. More like a man cornered by the consequences of his own culture. "You want me to help you repair what your company's been getting wrong for years," she said. Russell didn't flinch. "Yes." "And why now?" she pressed. "Because it was caught? Because it involved a board member, or because you realized for the first time that dignity can't be measured in dollars? There was a pause, the kind that stretches far too long in a room full of executives. Finally, Russell spoke, his voice quieter. Because we failed, and you made it impossible to pretend we didn't. Rena glanced at Morris, then back to the monitor. Then here are my terms, she said. 1. Every in-flight staff member must undergo bias and dignity training quarterly, not yearly, not optional. 2. Anonymous passenger feedback must be reviewed by an independent third party. 3. I will accept your invitation to the advisory board, but I won't be your figurehead. I want decision-making power, Morris added, and that includes hiring audits, frontline staff diversity reports, and public transparency. Russell looked down briefly, no longer hiding the weight of what he was being asked to commit to. Then he raised his eyes again. Approved. A soft gasp escaped from the assistant with the tablet. The HR observer blinked, stunned. Rena leaned back in her chair. Good. Then I'll begin writing your policy draft tomorrow morning. Russell straightened slightly, then nodded once more. You've given us something valuable tonight, Mrs. Ellington. Thank you. She stood again, calmly, the room rising with her. No, Mr. Heron, she said softly. I didn't give it to you. I took it back. Morris stood as well, his hand resting on the back of her chair. If you follow through on this, your airline might become worth flying again. If you don't, he left the sentence unfinished. Russell understood. We will. As they exited the conference room, the hallway outside was quiet, the terminal now nearly empty. The young assistant rushed ahead to call their car, but Rena and Morris didn't follow immediately. They stopped by the long windows overlooking the tarmac. The same plane they had just flown on was being prepared for its next flight. A cleaning crew had boarded. The pilot, visible from a distance, was speaking to a technician beside the wing. Rena stared out, thoughtful. It's strange, she said. I always thought change would feel loud, like a protest, like shouting. Morris smiled faintly. Sometimes change starts with a whisper, but when it's the right whisper, it echoes. She nodded, slipping her arm through his. Let's go home. They walked down the terminal, past sleeping shops and silent gates, toward a future they had not planned, but had shaped, one choice at a time. And as they disappeared through the double doors into the quiet of the city night, the airline behind them had already begun to rewrite itself. Not because it wanted to, but because Rena Ellington made sure it had to. Outside the terminal, the cold night wrapped around them like a waiting question. Rena and Morris stepped into the back seat of the black car arranged by the airline, a quiet, sleek sedan that pulled away from the curb with barely a sound. The city lights blurred past the windows as they drove, but Rena wasn't looking out anymore. Her mind was still inside that conference room, inside that plane, inside that moment when her silence had finally cracked and let the truth spill forward. Morris sat beside her, his phone buzzing with emails, board members forwarding statements, legal teams confirming documentation, policy writers requesting input. But he silenced the device and placed it in his coat pocket. You were extraordinary, he said, breaking the long quiet. I wasn't trying to be, Rena replied. I was just tired. Tired of being quiet. Tired of pretending that being invisible was safer. Morris nodded. That kind of tired builds revolutions. She leaned her head against the window. It shouldn't take revolutions to get basic respect, Morris. We were treated like trespassers, on seats we paid for, and I keep thinking, if I didn't have your name, your connection, your title, what would have happened to me? Morris reached across the seat and took her hand. That's the question you're going to make them ask themselves every time they train someone new. The silence returned for a while, comfortable this time. The silence of a storm passing. They arrived at their brownstone just past 1 a.m., the porch light still glowing like a promise. As Rena stepped inside, she kicked off her shoes slowly, her body exhausted, but her spirit still wide awake. She made tea without speaking, poured Morris a cup, and they both sat at the small table in their kitchen, the same one where they'd argued over bills, laughed at old movies, and once decided to skip a vacation because work felt too heavy. Now, work was everywhere, and it felt lighter than it had in years. "I've been invisible most of my life," Raina said suddenly, staring into the steam of her tea. "At work, at stores, even on that flight. But tonight, when I stood in that galley, I didn't feel invisible." "You weren't," Morris said. "You were undeniable." A faint sound pinged from her phone. She picked it up and found a new email in her inbox. The subject line read, "From Chloe, thank you." Raina opened it, surprised. "Mrs. Ellington, I know I probably don't deserve your time, but I wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you said, but for how you said it. I've already enrolled in 2 equity workshops, and I'm also asking to shadow senior crew so I can learn what true professionalism looks like. I hope that someday I can make someone else feel as seen as you made me feel, even in your silence. If I get another chance in this job, I want it to mean something." Gratefully, Chloe G. Rena stared at the screen, her lips parting slightly. She didn't reply right away. She wasn't sure if she would. Some lessons had to stay with the person learning them. Some changes didn't need applause. Later that night, Morris turned off the lights, and they both lay in bed without speaking. The moonlight crept through the blinds, casting lines across the wall, thin, sharp, soft. Raina whispered into the dark, "Do you think this is really going to last? Or is it just their way of patching the problem until the noise dies down?" Morris's voice came low and steady. "It depends." "On what?" "On whether you're willing to keep being louder than the silence." She didn't answer for a while, then she said, "I don't want to be loud." "You don't have to be," he replied. "You just have to be unignorable." She let those words settle over her like a blanket. Unignorable. Not feared. Not famous. Not pitied. Just real. Whole. Seen. As sleep finally came to take her, Raina carried with her a truth more powerful than any speech she'd ever make in a boardroom. Dignity doesn't beg to be noticed. It changes the room by refusing to leave quietly. And Raina Ellington had no intention of leaving quietly again. The sun crept into the city the next morning without fanfare, light bleeding softly through narrow alleyways, stretching across rooftops, glinting on the glass of high-rise windows. Inside the Ellington home, the stillness lingered a little longer than usual. There were no alarms, no rush to meetings, no coffee spilled during a last-minute dash to beat traffic. Instead, there was quiet. Earned, deep quiet. Raina sat at the edge of the bed, already dressed in a dark navy blouse and soft gray slacks. Nothing flashy, nothing loud. Just her, standing in a different version of herself. A stronger version. One that had been there all along, buried beneath decades of second-guessing. She made her way to the living room, where Morris had already set up his laptop at the dining table. A news anchor's voice played faintly from the small television nearby. And in an unprecedented step, Morning Sky Airlines has released a statement this morning outlining a sweeping set of reforms following an in-flight incident that has gained national attention. According to sources close to the board, the airline's internal policies are undergoing immediate restructuring, including quarterly staff training on bias, passenger dignity rights, and the formation of a new equity advisory board chaired by... The anchor paused slightly for emphasis. Mrs. Raina Ellington, who passengers say calmly but firmly held the crew accountable after being unfairly targeted during a cross-country flight. Her actions are being described as measured, courageous, and transformative. Morris looked up from his screen and smiled. "I guess they finally said your name out loud." Raina didn't smile. Not out of coldness, but out of clarity. "They said it because they had to," she replied. "Now I have to make sure they keep saying it for the right reasons." Her phone buzzed again. She picked it up and saw dozens of notifications, LinkedIn connection requests, email inquiries, interview invites, and a message flagged as urgent from a women's leadership council she'd applied to years ago and never heard back from. She opened it. Mrs. Ellington, we're deeply moved by your recent work and public stance on dignity and justice. We'd be honored to have you speak at our annual summit next month. Your voice has become one of rare authenticity, quiet power in a world of noise. Let us know if you're open to it. Warmly, Dr. Alea Verne, Executive Chair, Voices of Leadership Conference. Raina put the phone down. It's strange, she murmured. They all come now. Not because I changed, but because I finally stood still long enough for them to notice. Morris stepped behind her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. You didn't ask for attention. You demanded presence. That's louder than any speech. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathed in slowly, then exhaled. I'm not done. No, he said. You're just starting. The rest of the morning moved quickly. Conference calls, policy reviews, a digital onboarding session with the airline's leadership team. Raina spoke little, but when she did, they listened. Not because she raised her voice, but because she never wasted a word. By mid-afternoon, she finally sat down at her writing desk near the window, where the sunlight hit the edge of the wood. She opened a new document on her laptop and typed, Raina Ellington, Internal Memo Number 1. Subject, Dignity is not policy. It's culture. She paused, then kept typing. Every sentence was deliberate, not just instructions for change, but reminders that real reform wasn't something signed, it was something sustained. And for every person like Chloe who had judged too quickly, there were 10 more Rainas sitting quietly in waiting rooms, boarding planes, applying for jobs, holding in their dignity like a breath they were afraid to release. The document was long, and by the time she finished, her tea had gone cold beside her. But she didn't notice, not until Morris knocked lightly on the door. There's someone here to see you, he said. She looked up. Who? He hesitated. The regional director for flight operations. He asked for 10 minutes of your time. Raina closed her laptop and stood. Let's make sure he earns them. She walked slowly through the house, her steps neither fast nor forced, only certain. And with each one the world around her adjusted, not to make room for her, but to recognize the space she had always deserved, because Raina Ellington was no longer content to be treated fairly after a mistake. She was going to change what fairness looked like before one ever happened again. The guest sat patiently in the front room, tall, well-dressed with a polished badge that read, a Kessler, Regional Flight Operations Director. He stood the moment Raina entered. His handshake was firm, but not forceful. She noticed immediately that he didn't try to lead the interaction. That was new. Mrs. Ellington, he said, thank you for taking the time to meet. I've read everything. The report, the transcript, your memo. He paused, folding his hands. Frankly, I've read it twice. Raina sat across from him in a modest armchair, no notes in front of her, no rehearsed answers. She didn't need them. And what did it say to you? She asked calmly. Kessler hesitated, then replied. It said we've built a structure where passengers only feel human if they match what we expect, where silence has become a survival skill, and where dignity has been reduced to a luxury instead of a right. She studied him for a moment. Do you believe that? Or are you here to tell me you've heard it? He didn't flinch. I believe it, and I'm not here to talk. I'm here to ask. Ask what? For your leadership, not as an advisor, but as a policy author. I want you to rewrite how we teach professionalism from the ground up, from training manuals to flight scripts to employee evaluations. We've been focused on safety, service, and speed. You made us realize we've been missing the fourth pillar, respect. Raina leaned forward slightly. You know that means rethinking your culture, not just your training. It means confronting supervisors who reward efficiency over empathy. It means letting go of people who pass reviews but fail passengers. Kessler nodded. I know. And we're ready. Raina didn't smile. She didn't soften. She simply said, then start by naming it. He blinked. Naming it? What happened to me? What happened to Chloe? What happens to people every day? Quiet, subtle erasure. You want to rewrite policy? Start by calling it what it is. Not a misunderstanding, not a misjudgment, bias, disrespect, invisibility. Kessler was quiet, then said softly, "You're right. And after you name it," she continued, "build protections that don't require someone like me to sit in first class for change to happen. Build systems that work even when no one's watching." He exhaled, nodded again, and rose to leave. "We'll draft the new framework based on your recommendations. You'll have full oversight before anything is published." Raina stood as well. "I'll expect a complete copy of every change, and I want sign-off before implementation. If even one sentence is watered down, I walk away." "You'll have it," he said. As he reached the door, he turned one last time. "Mrs. Ellington, what do you want people to remember about this moment 5 years from now?" She thought for a long moment before answering. "I don't care if they remember me," she said. "I care that they remember how it felt to be treated like they belonged, without having to prove it." With that, he left. The door closed quietly behind him. Raina stood alone in the hallway for a moment, staring at nothing, not out of fatigue but reflection. She hadn't set out to become a leader, a figurehead, a voice. She had boarded a flight, that was all. But injustice has a way of waking the sleeping part of people. She returned to her writing desk and reopened her laptop. Emails were still pouring in. Some from media outlets, others from advocacy groups. A few from strangers who had watched the news and recognized something of themselves in her story. One subject line caught her attention. "My name is Darlene. You don't know me, but thank you." Raina opened it. "Mrs. Ellington, I work at a gas station in Georgia. I watched your story on my phone during my break. I've never been on a plane, I don't even know what first class looks like. But when you spoke, it felt like you were standing in front of someone just like me. I've spent years thinking I was only worth what people expected of me. You changed that, so thank you. Not for being brave, but for being unshakable. You made space for all of us." Darlene H. Raina sat back in her chair. Her throat tightened. She stared at the screen, then slowly hit reply. "Darlene, you don't need a plane to know your worth. Keep standing. I'll keep building. There's more space ahead. Raina." She hit send, then stood to pour herself a fresh cup of tea. Outside, the city was beginning to pulse with its usual rhythm. Cars honking, crosswalks blinking, buildings humming with fluorescent energy. But inside her home, Raina moved quietly, centered in her purpose. She had entered that plane as a passenger. She exited it as a force. And from that day forward, no matter where she sat, the world would know. Raina Ellington didn't ask for space. She taught the world how to make room. If you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to this channel for more powerful stories coming soon.